The dust devil spun itself to death against the canyon wall as Marcus Thornfield pulled the reins of his bay mare, her breath coming heavy in the thin desert air. The sun hung like a copper coin above the mesas, casting long shadows that stretched toward his modest ranch house, still 3 miles distant. He had been checking fence lines along the territorial boundary, where Apache land met settler claims in an uneasy truce that felt more like held breath than peace. The silence out here was complete, broken only by the creak of leather and the occasional whisper of wind through sagebrush. Marcus preferred it this way, alone with his thoughts and the endless sky. But then he heard it, faint as a prayer whispered into an empty church, a sound that made his spine straighten and his hand move instinctively toward the rifle slung across his back. A low moan, barely human, drifted from somewhere beyond the cluster of red rocks ahead. He dismounted quickly, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a soft thud. The mare snorted nervously, ears pricked forward, sensing something her rider had not yet understood. Marcus approached the rocks with careful steps, every nerve alert to the possibility of ambush or worse. What he found made his stomach clench with a mixture of rage and pity. A young Apache brave, no more than 17, lay crumpled against the base of the largest boulder. His chest was a mess of torn buckskin and dried blood, 3 bullet wounds visible in the fading light. His breathing came in shallow, desperate gasps, each one seeming to be his last. His long black hair was matted with blood and dust, his face paint smeared and faded. The boy's eyes fluttered open as Marcus approached, dark and fevered, but still fierce with the pride of his people. He tried to speak, but only managed a whisper of air through cracked lips. Marcus knelt beside him, studying the wounds with the practiced eye of a man who had seen too much violence in his 38 years. "Easy there, son," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying the rough gentleness of a man unused to comforting words. "Don't try to move. You're hurt bad, but you're alive." The brave's hand moved weakly toward the knife at his belt, more from instinct than any real threat. Marcus caught his wrist, gently but firmly. "I'm not here to hurt you, boy. Name's Marcus Thornfield. I got a place not far from here, got medicine, got clean water. You want to live through this night, you'll let me help you." For a long moment, they stared at each other across the divide of language and blood and history. The boy's breathing was growing more labored, pink foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. Marcus had seen enough gut-shot men to know the signs. This one was dying, and dying hard. Without waiting for permission he would never receive, Marcus lifted the brave as carefully as he could manage. The boy was lighter than expected, hollow-boned like a bird, but there was steel in his frame, even in unconsciousness. Marcus carried him to his horse, draping him across the saddle before mounting behind him, one arm supporting the wounded body as they rode toward home. The ranch house sat in a shallow valley, protected by ridges on 3 sides, and open to the south, where a creek wandered down from the high country. It was a modest place, built with his own hands from pine logs and native stone, but it was solid and honest. A barn, a corral, a vegetable garden tended with more hope than skill. Marcus had built it all after leaving the cavalry, after seeing too many things that haunted his sleep and poisoned his dreams of peace. He carried the brave inside and laid him on the kitchen table, the same table where he took his lonely meals and wrote his infrequent letters to a sister back in Missouri who still believed he was the same man who had ridden west with stars in his eyes and righteousness in his heart. The lantern light flickered across the boy's face, revealing features that were strong despite his youth, with high cheekbones and a jaw that would have been proud if it were not slack with unconsciousness. Marcus heated water and gathered what medical supplies he possessed, meager as they were. He had some experience with wounds, having served as an unofficial medic in his cavalry unit before his discharge. He cleaned the blood away carefully, revealing the true extent of the damage. 2 bullets had passed clean through, but the 3rd was still lodged deep in the boy's chest, close to his heart. Working by lamplight, Marcus did what he could. He cleaned the wounds with whiskey, stitched what could be stitched, and bandaged everything with strips torn from his cleanest shirt. The boy's breathing grew steadier as the night wore on, though he remained unconscious. When dawn finally broke, painting the eastern sky the color of old rose, Marcus allowed himself to hope that his patient might survive. The brave woke on the third day, his eyes snapping open with the alertness of a wild animal suddenly aware of danger. He tried to sit up, gasping at the pain that shot through his chest, and Marcus was there immediately, pressing him gently back down onto the cot where he had been moved. "Take it easy," Marcus said, offering a cup of water. "You've been out for days, lost a lot of blood." Udin, the boy, studied him with suspicious eyes, taking in the simple furnishings of the cabin, the rifle that leaned against the wall within easy reach, but not pointed in his direction. He accepted the water with obvious reluctance, drinking carefully, as if expecting it to be poisoned. "You speak English?" Marcus asked. A slight nod. "What's your name?" The boy's jaw tightened, and for a moment Marcus thought he would not answer. Then quietly, "Ayana." Marcus frowned. "That's a girl's name." The brave's eyes flashed with something that might have been pain or might have been anger. "Is my name," he said, his English careful and precise despite the accent that marked him as one of the people. Later, as Marcus tended to the wound cleaning and changing bandages with the same patience he showed his injured horses, the truth came out in pieces. Ayana was not a brave at all, but a young woman who had disguised herself as a warrior to fight alongside her brother and cousins when the soldiers came to remove their band from the sacred canyon where they had lived for generations. "They said we were trespassing," she whispered, her voice bitter with the memory, "on land that belonged to our grandmothers' grandmothers. They came with papers, with soldiers, with guns, said we had to go to the reservation, live like cattle in a pen." Marcus listened without comment, his hands gentle as he worked. He had been part of such operations once, had worn the blue uniform and carried out orders without questioning what they meant for the people being moved. The weight of that knowledge sat heavy in his chest. "My brother, he said we would fight. Better to die free than live as prisoners. So we fought." Her voice broke slightly. "We fought, and they killed him, killed my cousins. Shot me and left me for dead when I would not stop fighting." The silence that followed was filled with the soft sounds of the desert evening, the distant call of a hawk, the whisper of wind through the eaves. Marcus finished his work and sat back, studying her face in the lamplight. She was beautiful in the way of her people, with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes that held depths he could not fathom. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. "Had a daughter once," he said finally. "Lost her to the fever when she was about your age. Sometimes a man gets a chance to do something right, maybe balance the scales a little." It was not the whole truth, but it was true enough. He did not tell her about the village his unit had burned, about the children they had left orphaned, about the nightmares that still woke him sweating and reaching for a gun. Some truths were too heavy to share with a wounded girl who already carried too much sorrow. The days that followed fell into a quiet rhythm. Ayana grew stronger, though she moved carefully, favoring her wounded side. She helped with small tasks around the ranch, mending clothes with quick, precise stitches, tending the garden with knowledge of plants he had never possessed. They spoke little, but there was a growing ease between them, a comfort that surprised them both. Marcus found himself watching her when he thought she would not notice, admiring the grace with which she moved despite her injuries, the way she seemed to listen to sounds he could not hear. She had a laugh that came rarely, but when it did, it reminded him of water running over stones, clear and bright and completely unexpected. It was on the 10th day that the rider came. Marcus saw the dust first, a thin line against the western sky that meant trouble. He called to Ayana, who was hanging clothes on the line behind the house, and she understood immediately. By the time the rider reached the ranch, she had vanished as completely as smoke in wind. The man who dismounted in Marcus's yard wore the uniform of a territorial marshal, but his badge looked newly minted, and his eyes held the hard gleam of someone who enjoyed his authority a little too much. He was young, maybe 25, with pale skin that burned easily under the desert sun, and hands that were soft enough to suggest he had not been wearing that badge for long. "Afternoon," the marshal said, touching his hat brim with mock courtesy. "Marshal Hendricks, I'm tracking a fugitive through these parts. Young Apache, wounded, probably seeking shelter. You seen anything?" Marcus leaned against his porch railing, his expression neutral. "Lot of desert out here, Marshal. Hard to say what a man might see." Hendricks's eyes narrowed. "This one's wanted for murder. Killed a settler family north of here, burned them out. There's a bounty of $200 for the one who brings him in." "Him?" Marcus asked mildly. "Her, actually, goes by Ayana. Savage as they come, from what I hear. Witnesses say she fought like a demon, killed 3 men before they brought her down. Course she got away somehow, but we'll find her." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had seen Ayana's wounds, knew they came from being shot while running away, not while attacking, but he kept his face carefully blank. "Like I said, Marshal, haven't seen hide nor hair of anyone out here. Just me and the desert." Hendricks studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You mind if I take a look around, just to be thorough? You got a warrant?" The marshal's hand moved casually to rest on his gun butt. "Don't need one. This is a matter of public safety. You hiding something, Thornfield?" Marcus straightened, his own hand finding the stock of the rifle that leaned against the wall beside him. "Just a man who values his privacy, Marshal. And the law." They stared at each other across the dusty yard, the afternoon sun beating down on both of them. Finally, Hendricks stepped back toward his horse. "I'll be back," he said, swinging into the saddle, "with more men next time. You think about what side of the law you want to be on." Marcus watched him ride away until the dust settled and the desert silence returned. Only then did he call softly into the empty air. "He's gone." Ayana emerged from whatever hiding place she had found, her face pale but determined. "They will come back," she said simply. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "They will." That night, as they sat by the fire sharing a meal of beans and cornbread, Ayana told him the rest of her story. The family Hendricks claimed she had murdered had been found dead on land that belonged to her people, land they had tried to farm without permission or payment. The Apache band had protested peacefully, seeking dialogue, trying to find a solution that would let both peoples live in peace. "The man, he came to our council fire," she said, staring into the flames. "Said he would share the water, pay tribute for the use of the land. My uncle, he was chief, he agreed. We helped them plant, showed them which plants were good for medicine, which roots could be eaten. For a whole season we lived as neighbors." Her voice grew harder. "Then soldiers came, said the Apache had attacked, murdered the family, burned their cabin, but we were 20 miles away in the high country, gathering pine nuts for winter. The whole band, everyone could say where we were. Did not matter. They said we were liars, said we were savages who could not be trusted." Marcus poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks up into the darkness. "What really happened to the family?" "Other settlers," Ayana said quietly. "Men who wanted their land, their water rights. Easier to blame the Apache than fight their own people in court. So they killed them, burned everything, left signs that it was an Indian raid. And the soldiers, they did not care about truth. They cared about having someone to punish." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of injustice and the sound of the wind through the eaves. Marcus had heard similar stories before, had even participated in operations based on evidence that seemed thin in retrospect. The frontier was a place where truth often mattered less than convenience. "Your uncle," he said finally. "What happened to him?" Ayana's face went stone still. "They hanged him from the council tree. Made the whole band watch. Said he was an example of what happened to murdering savages, My aunt, she threw herself from the cliff that night, could not live with the shame, with the fear of what would come next. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of guilt settle on his shoulders. He had worn the blue uniform, had followed orders, had participated in the machinery that created stories like this one. That he had left the army, had tried to build a different life, did not erase what he had been part of. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it more than she could know. She looked at him across the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You were a soldier?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. "You kill my people." The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus met her gaze and did not look away. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." She studied his face for a long time, searching for something he was not sure he possessed. "But you saved me," she said finally. "Doesn't balance out," he replied. "Nothing I do will ever balance out what I did before." Ayana reached across the space between them and took his hand, her fingers warm and calloused from work. "Maybe not," she said. "But you try. That matters." They sat in silence after that, hands clasped, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. Neither of them spoke of what would come when the marshal returned, but both of them knew that their time was running short. The attack came at dawn, just as Marcus was feeding the horses. He heard them before he saw them, the thunder of hooves that meant trouble riding hard toward his ranch. 12 riders, led by Marshal Hendricks, spread out in a line as they approached. Half of them wore badges of one kind or another. The rest looked like the kind of men who hired themselves out for work that decent people would not do. Marcus stepped into the yard, his rifle in his hands, but not yet raised. Ayana was inside the house, hopefully hidden in the root cellar he had showed her the night before. The plan was simple. If shooting started, she would slip out the back and make for the hills. They both knew she would not survive another capture. "Morning, Thornfield," Hendricks called, reining in his horse 20 yards away. "Told you I'd be back." "So you did," Marcus replied. "Still no warrant, I'd guess." Hendricks smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Don't need one. Got a dozen witnesses here say they saw smoke signals from your ranch yesterday. Apache signals, calling for help, we figure." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But lies were easier to sell than truth when the truth was inconvenient. "Funny thing about witnesses," Marcus said conversationally. "Sometimes they see what they're paid to see." The marshal's face darkened. "You're harboring a fugitive, Thornfield, a murderer. Stand aside and let us search your property, or we'll do it over your dead body." Marcus raised his rifle, not pointing it at anyone in particular, but making his intentions clear. "This is my land," he said quietly. "My home. You want to search it, you come back with proper paper from a proper judge. Until then, you can ride on." 12 against 1, Hendricks observed. "Poor odds, even for an ex-soldier." "Maybe," Marcus agreed, "but I was a good soldier. Probably take 3 or 4 of you with me. Question is, which ones?" The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Marcus could see the calculations running behind Hendricks' eyes, weighing the value of capturing one Apache girl against the cost in men and explanations that would have to be made afterward. Several of the hired guns were already looking nervous, their hands moving restlessly on their reins. That was when the sound came from the hills. At first, it was just a whisper, like wind through the canyons. Then it grew, building into something that raised the hair on the back of Marcus's neck and made every horse in the yard dance nervously. It was the sound of voices, many voices, rising in harmony from the ridges that surrounded the ranch. Apache voices, singing what sounded like a war song. Hendricks spun in his saddle, searching the rocks and sagebrush for signs of movement. "What the hell?" The first warrior appeared on the ridge to the north, silhouetted against the morning sky. Then another, and another. Within moments, the ridges were lined with mounted figures, more than Marcus could count. They sat their horses in perfect stillness, but their presence was unmistakable. Watching, waiting. "Jesus Christ," one of the hired guns whispered. How many of them are there? Marcus found himself wondering the same thing. The ridges seemed to be moving with warriors, materializing out of the landscape like spirits taking physical form. He had never seen so many Apache in one place, and he had no idea what they were doing here or what they intended. That was when Ayana stepped out of the house. She moved with quiet dignity, her head high despite the rifle barrels that turned toward her. She had braided her hair and painted her face with traditional designs, transforming herself from the wounded girl Marcus had been caring for into something timeless and proud. She walked to the center of the yard and stood beside Marcus, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I am Ayana of the Red Rock people," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the desert air. "Daughter of Chief Manuelito, who died with honor. I am the one you seek." Hendricks licked his lips nervously, his eyes darting between the girl and the watching warriors. "You're under arrest for murder and arson. Come quietly, and nobody else has to get hurt." Ayana laughed, a sound like silver bells in the wind. "I have killed no one who did not try to kill me first. I have burned nothing that was not already poisoned with lies. But if you believe I am guilty, then try to take me." The marshal looked around at his men, seeing doubt and fear in their faces. The hired guns were fingering their reins, clearly calculating their chances of reaching the open desert before the warriors on the ridges could cut them off. Even the other lawmen looked uncertain, their eyes moving constantly toward the hills. "This is your last chance, Thornfield," Hendricks said, his voice higher than before. "Stand aside or be counted as an accessory to murder." Marcus never lowered his rifle. "Already told you, Marshal, this is my land, my home. Anyone who wants to disturb the peace here is going to have to go through me first." The singing from the ridges grew louder, and now Marcus could see that the warriors were beginning to move, not advancing but flowing like water along the high ground, positioning themselves to cut off any retreat. There had to be 200 of them, maybe more, appearing and disappearing among the rocks like ghosts made flesh. Hendricks raised his own rifle, his face flushed with anger and fear. "Then you'll die with her." "Maybe," Marcus said calmly, "but not today." The voice that spoke from behind them was deep and resonant, carrying the authority of generations. "Not today, and not by your hand." Everyone turned to see an elderly Apache man riding slowly down from the eastern ridge. He was magnificent despite his age, sitting his paint horse with the grace of a natural horseman. His hair was white as snow, braided with silver ornaments that caught the morning light. His face was deeply lined but strong, with eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom and sorrow of his people. Behind him rode a younger man, tall and lean, with the bearing of a warrior, but dressed in the mixture of Apache and Mexican clothing that marked him as someone who moved between worlds. Marcus recognized the type from his army days. Scouts, translators, men who served as bridges between peoples who could barely understand each other. The old man reined in his horse beside Ayana and spoke to her in rapid Apache. She answered in the same language, her voice respectful but firm. Marcus caught only a few words, but he could hear the affection in the exchange, the deep bond between the two. Finally, the old man turned toward Hendricks and the other white men. When he spoke, it was in English, heavily accented but clear. "I am Walking Bear, grandfather to this girl, leader of the Red Rock people. You come to my granddaughter's refuge with guns and lies. This is not wisdom." Hendricks found his voice, though it cracked slightly. "She's a wanted criminal, old man. Murdered a family of settlers. This is a matter for the law." Walking Bear's eyes were like chips of obsidian. "Whose law?" "The law that says Apache cannot live on the land of their fathers. The law that says a man can claim ownership of the earth itself, like claiming to own the wind." The younger man moved his horse forward slightly, his hand resting casually on the stock of a rifle that looked well used. "My grandfather asks a reasonable question," he said, his English perfect and unaccented. "By what right do you come here with guns to take a girl who has harmed no one?" "She's a murderer," Hendricks repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. The young man smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "You say this, but my people were camped in the high country when this supposed murder took place, 20 miles from the dead family, gathering food for winter. Every man, woman, and child of our band can attest to this. We have witnesses. Do you?" The marshal's face was growing red with frustration. "Indian witnesses don't count in a court of law." "Ah," Walking Bear said softly, "but white witnesses do, even when they lie, even when they kill their own people and blame the Apache to steal their land." The silence that followed was electric with tension. Marcus could see the truth of it in Hendricks's face, the way his eyes darted away from the old man's steady gaze. This was not about justice. It had never been about justice. "You got something to say. Say it," Hendricks snapped. Walking Bear gestured toward the hills, where the warriors still waited in their hundreds. "We say this. The girl is under our protection now. She goes where we go. If you want to take her, you fight all of us." One of the hired guns cleared his throat nervously. "Marshal, maybe we ought to—" "Shut up," Hendricks snarled. But Marcus could see the calculation in his eyes, the slow realization that 12 men, no matter how well armed, could not prevail against the force that surrounded them. The young Apache moved his horse closer, his voice dropping to a conversational tone. "There is something else you should know, Marshal. My name is Joseph Crowfeather. I am a graduate of the Carlisle School, and I study law. I know the territorial statutes very well." Hendrick's face went pale. "There is no warrant for this girl's arrest," Crowfeather continued. "There is no evidence against her, except the word of men who were not present when the supposed crime was committed. And there is no legal authority that allows you to enter private property without cause to search for someone who has not been formally charged with any crime." The marshal's jaw worked silently, his rifle wavering in his hands. "Furthermore," the young man went on, "harassment of citizens based on their race is a federal crime, as is conspiracy to commit murder under color of law. I have 3 witnesses here who heard you threaten to kill Mr. Thornfield if he did not surrender a person you have no legal right to arrest." Hendricks looked around at his men, seeing doubt and fear replacing the easy confidence they had ridden in with. The hired guns were already pulling their horses backward, clearly ready to bolt at the first sign of real trouble. "This isn't over," the marshal said finally, his voice hoarse with defeat. Walking Bear nodded gravely. "No, it is not, but it is over for today. You go now. You do not come back without proper papers from proper judges, and you remember what you have seen here. The Red Rock people are not without friends." The old man's eyes found Marcus, and something passed between them, a recognition that transcended the barriers of race and language. Marcus nodded slightly, understanding. Hendricks wheeled his horse around and spurred it toward the open desert, his men following in a cloud of dust and muttered curses. They rode hard, clearly eager to put distance between themselves and the watching warriors on the ridges. Only when they were out of sight did the singing from the hills finally stop. Marcus lowered his rifle and turned toward Walking Bear, unsure of what to say or do. The old man dismounted and approached him slowly, his eyes taking in the ranch house, the garden, the corrals where Marcus's horses stood watching nervously. "You are the one who saved my granddaughter," Walking Bear said. It was not a question. Marcus nodded, found her hurt, did what I could. The old man studied his face for a long moment. "You were soldier, blue coat soldier." Again, Marcus nodded, waiting for judgment. Walking Bear was quiet for what seemed like a long time. Then he reached into his saddlebags and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a pipe carved from red stone, its bowl shaped like an eagle's head. "This was my father's," he said softly, "and his father's before him, sacred pipe for making peace between enemies." He filled the bowl with tobacco from a leather pouch, then lit it with a burning twig from the coals of a small fire that one of the warriors had built. He drew on it slowly, letting the smoke curl up toward the sky, then offered it to Marcus. "You were enemy," Walking Bear said simply. "Now you are friend. You risk your life for Apache girl. This is worthy of honor." Marcus accepted the pipe with shaking hands, understanding the magnitude of what was being offered. He had fought against these people, had been part of the machinery that drove them from their lands and confined them to reservations. That this man would offer him peace, would call him friend, was more than he had ever dared hope for. They smoked in silence, while the warriors on the ridges began to move, flowing like water back toward whatever hidden camps they had emerged from. Soon, only a handful remained, close family and trusted advisors who would escort Walking Bear home. "Grandfather," Ayana said softly, approaching the two men, "what will happen now?" Walking Bear looked at her with eyes full of love and sadness. "Now you choose, granddaughter. You can come with us, live with the people in the high country where the soldiers cannot easily follow. Or," he glanced meaningfully at Marcus, who felt his heart stop for a moment, "or you can stay here with the white man who saved you, build a life between worlds as some of our people have done." Ayana looked at Marcus, her eyes searching his face. "Would you want that?" she asked softly. "A life with an Apache woman. It would not be easy. There would always be men like the Marshal, always be people who would call you a traitor to your own kind." Marcus thought of his empty house, his solitary meals, his nights haunted by memories of things he could never undo. Then he looked at this woman who had brought light into his darkness, who had shown him that redemption was possible even for someone like him. "I'd want that," he said quietly, "more than anything in the world." Walking Bear smiled for the first time that day, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Then it is decided. But first there must be ceremony, Apache ceremony, to bind you properly in the eyes of the people." What followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The remaining warriors built a fire in the center of the yard, and Walking Bear began to sing in the old language, his voice rising and falling in patterns that seemed to echo the rhythm of the desert wind. Ayana joined him, her voice weaving through his like silver thread through copper. They painted Marcus's face with clay and plant dyes, marking him with symbols he did not understand, but felt in his bones. They gave him a new name in Apache, something that sounded like wind through the canyons, and Ayana translated it with tears in her eyes. "He who heals the broken circle." When the ceremony was complete, Walking Bear placed his granddaughter's hand in Marcus's and spoke words in both languages, binding them together with vows older than the treaties that had torn their peoples apart. As the sun set and the warriors prepared to leave, Walking Bear pulled Marcus aside one last time. "The Marshal will come back," he said quietly. "Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but he will come back. Men like him do not forget what they see as insults." Marcus nodded. "I figured as much." The old man smiled. "Good. Then you are learning wisdom. When he comes, you will not be alone. The people have long memories too. We do not forget our friends." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness, his warriors following like shadows. Soon the ranch was quiet again, but it felt different now. No longer isolated, no longer cursed by the weight of old sins. Marcus and Ayana stood in the doorway of their home, watching the stars emerge in the vast sky. She had told him her real name during the ceremony, whispering it in his ear like a secret gift. Itzel, meaning rainbow, a bridge between earth and sky, between storm and sunshine, between two worlds that had been at war too long. "Are you afraid?" she asked, her hand finding his in the darkness. Marcus considered the question seriously. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new tests of their resolve. The world would not make it easy for them to love each other, to build a life together. But tonight, with her warm presence beside him, and the memory of her grandfather's blessing still fresh in his heart, fear seemed like a luxury he could not afford. "No," he said finally, "not anymore." They went inside together, closing the door against the desert night, but not against the future. Whatever came, they would face it together, two broken people who had found a way to make each other whole. In the months that followed, the ranch became something unprecedented in that harsh land. A place where Apache and white settlers could meet without bloodshed, could trade goods and stories, and sometimes even friendship. Word spread slowly but surely that Marcus Thornfield's place was neutral ground, that a man's character mattered more than the color of his skin. Hendricks did come back, as Walking Bear had predicted, but he came alone and without badges or warrants. He found Marcus and Itzel working together in their garden, her belly round with their first child, and saw something in their contentment that finally broke through his hatred. He did not stay long, but when he left, he tipped his hat to them both and wished them well. The child was born on a spring morning when the desert was carpeted with wildflowers, a daughter with her father's grey eyes and her mother's copper skin. They named her Hope, in English and Apache both, and she grew up hearing stories in two languages, learning to see the world through eyes that recognized no boundaries between peoples. When she was old enough to understand, they told her about the day her parents met, about the wounded girl and the lonely rancher who found their way to each other across a divide that had seemed unbridgeable. They told her about her great-grandfather Walking Bear, who had ridden out with 500 warriors to protect love against hatred, and about the lesson he had taught them all. That peace was always possible, but it required courage from ordinary people willing to risk everything for what they knew was right. And in the evening, when the desert wind whispered through the eaves and the stars emerged in their ancient patterns, Hope would fall asleep to the sound of her parents' quiet laughter, safe in the knowledge that some bridges, once built, could never be broken.